Hey guys, it's Lindsay with Smooth Business Podcasting on the Leverage Your Podcast show. And today I have with me Graham Brown, the owner of Pickle and Co. It's an award-winning corporate podcasting agency, and they're pretty cool. They're like AI powered. You have so much knowledge, Graham, branding, storytelling. You're an author. And I love what we're going to talk about today is storytelling, because I feel like it's such this big buzzword and everyone's like, ooh, but then they don't really know what it means or what to do with it.
Could be a little bit disempowering, can't it? A bit overwhelming for
I
most
know.
people.
And we were talking earlier, and it's like, for me and other people too, I'm sure it's like, okay, storytelling in a podcast. Okay, that means I have to tell everyone my story of how I came to be, my trials, my tribulations. It's like, and that doesn't sell products and services.
No.
So it's like, can you help dispel some of those myths?
Yeah, I hope so. And thanks for the invite to the podcast. And I like what you say about your podcast. The bit that goes, podcasting can seem confusing at times. I'm reading your description, by the way. But it doesn't have to be. And I like that bit because I think people are confused, and you probably see this as well. People come to you, reach out to you. Hey, what do I do? How do I start? A big part of it is maybe, like you say, that people feel a sense of imposter syndrome. Hopefully we can talk a bit about that today. Yeah. Imposter syndrome. People feel, maybe I'm not Joe Rogan or I don't have his kind of guests on my podcast, or, I'm not Elon Musk. So who's going to listen to me and little old me, my story? So hopefully we can address that, because there's a big space in between, isn't it? Which is,
absolutely,
there's a lot of people out there who have stuff to tell.
I know. To me, I'm like, as long as you're sharing information that's going to help one or two people and it's going to help them better their thing, whether it's weight loss or podcast production or whatever, is like, I just want to, and it's fun. Honestly, it's like podcasting is fun, but you want to help people propel their business and their life and improve them in some way. So what is storytelling to you? Like, again, it's not necessarily my life story of my trials and tribulations and what I've overcome.
Yeah, I mean, there are many ways to define storytelling. Lots of books written on it. I think even Harvard Business School have courses on this thing.
Probably.
Now. That's how, it's something that the C-suite should be doing, and I'm sure they're getting their credits for doing these courses. But what is storytelling? It's really, we all know from when we were kids, gather around, when you gathered around and they took you on a magic carpet ride. They took you to places. That's the magic of stories. There was very much that sense of make-believe, wasn't it? And then we grew up at some point and we started, I suppose we were motivated more by fear. We started editing ourselves, and maybe we didn't really commit a little bit more of ourselves to that story, hit publish, maybe just backed off a little bit, maybe just made it a little bit more middle of the road. And all that make-believe disappeared. As kids, they make-believe. And my son, I remember when he was like 5 or 6 years old, went to a birthday party, he went dressed up as a pirate. Like, kids love being pirates, don't they? What a cool thing to be a pirate, make-believe, that sort of swashbuckling world. And yet when we grow up, we kind of edit it down. We're fearful.
I know.
So the whole point of what storytelling is, it's really about how do you create those connections with people, because that's what people really want. That's what they want, that involvement. They want that connection. It's an overused word, but they want authenticity.
No, it's true.
They want to know the real you. So the first thing people are going to do, hopefully maybe after they listen to this podcast with us two, is go and look at the About page on the website. That must be the most trafficked page, isn't it? People want to know who you are.
Yeah.
What are you about? What are your views on XYZ? Or how did you get into this business? That's what storytelling is. It's an invitation to take people on a journey. And that's how I define it. And, it isn't just once upon a time. Yeah, that is.
Yeah.
The stories we remember, the 3 little pigs and all that. But there are, whether it's selling iPods, as Steve Jobs did, iPhones, raising money, selling, we're all in the business of selling or hiring. We're all telling stories at some point.
That's true. And I guess, like, the story doesn't necessarily have to be your trials and tribulations, but it can be why, or I could share stories about my clients and their successes and what they've overcome or how they've improved XYZ. I'm a very like logical person, and I'm kind of like how to's, like if I have a problem, here's a solution. So I tend to like steer away from the stories only because that's the way my brain is built. But I totally understand, like, yes, you need to relate to people on a human level. Yes, you need to connect, and they need to relate to you and feel something towards you. And so like, how do you weave that in naturally without it feeling weird?
Without it feeling fake or forced, I think is what people are very sort of tuned into that now. It's interesting what you say, Lindsay, like you say, that you're a logical person. So maybe you want data, facts, you want to see the how-to, the steps, the prescriptive process, and so on. That telling us, sharing that with the audience already, that's a story. You've already told a story about yourself. Because really what stories are, I think of stories as, it's like a map. Like think of the map on your wall, or the last time you saw a map of the world, it's a 𝗁𝗍𝗃 projection, guaranteed. That's probably the one that you saw at school, right? And it's the same, isn't it? You've got Canada and America here on the left, and you've got the rest of the world on the right. And that's a representation of the world. You're basically giving people a framework to understand the world and how it looks. In the same way that you shared with us, I'm a logical person. In the same way, anything you say about your company, your product, your service is a story. You're giving people a frame to understand the truth about what you do. I'll give you an example. Some time ago, I used to teach storytelling to startup founders. As you can imagine, being a startup founder, you're raising money, you're always telling stories. And that may be, here's our data product. This is what it does. That's a story. You're helping people understand it. Somebody came up to me, one of the cohort came up to me afterwards and said, Graham, I don't want to tell a story. I want to tell the truth. And I said to him, look, Alvin, I call him Alvin. I said, if you don't tell me a story, I won't know what your truth is.
Ooh.
And that's the reality, is that we understand the world through story. We may not recognize it as a story, but everything that we're seeing, everything we're interacting, all value about your app or your consultancy is shaped and influenced and then filtered to us through the story that we understand it by. So your ability to give something a story is a way to frame data that has no meaning in itself. So that's really what it is. I think people shy away from story thinking it's some way of fabrication of the truth. And yet really what it is it's an enhancement of the truth. A very good example, we've all seen it recently, is flattening the curve. You remember that at the beginning of the pandemic that we've all kind of gone through? Remember that flattening the curve thing that came out? Help everybody understand how COVID can be controlled and dealt with. And that flattening the curve chart was a story. It basically said to us, these are the behaviors that we expect of everybody. This is the past, present, and future, good guys, bad guys. And you can imagine, how do you communicate with hundreds of millions, maybe billions of people through one simple chart? That's the power of a story. And so if we think that story is kind of like fairy tales and make-believe, we kind of miss out on the point that actually it's a very powerful way of communicating to people value. And that can be data as much as it can be, wizards and dragons, which is the sort of extreme on the other side. But they all share similarities.
That totally shifted the way I think about it. And it's almost like when you said framework, like you're building this box around it and this ability to help people understand the data, the process, whatever that is. That helped shift my brain a ton. Now you have a phrase, agile storytelling. Now, what is that and how is that different?
Agile storytelling is, how do you take an agile approach to telling stories? Because we were chatting about this, Lindsay, beforehand, that most people think their story is not worth telling. I think 99% of people think that, and that's fine. And one of the reasons is that if you've lived an interesting life, I think you've lived a messy life by fact, right? With de facto that, it wouldn't have been great if you graduated high school and said, I'm really interested in flying planes. And then you went to university and studied aeronautics, and then you got an internship at Boeing. And that's all you ever did all your life was design planes and fly planes.
Yeah.
Thing is, I've never met anybody like that.
No.
I've always met people, and I speak for myself, graduated with an AI degree, taught English in Japan, traveled the world for a bit, started a communications company. And you look back on it and you think, that's a real mess. And then you hear people
from A to B
to C to D.
Yeah.
Through all these kind of like pivots. That's really interesting, isn't it? That's kind of how we live our lives. And you see these TED Talks and think, well, this guy's just got it made. He was born to do this. The stars were in alignment for us. And so that's the 99% of people. We see this 1% and we think, wow, we're just not interesting enough. We didn't find our why. And it can be quite, I think, frustrating. Agile storytelling is really saying, you don't need a finished book to have a story worth telling. You can get started now. And a lot of the inspiration for this came from stand-up comedy, which I very much admire stand-up comedians.
They're brave people, think, wow, man.
Have you seen those guys like get on stage and just get heckled and like stay cool? How do they do that? That's just a lot of practice.
Yeah.
I was listening to Jerry Seinfeld. He's probably one of the legends of stand-up comedy, even though he's sort of semi-retired or retired now. But there was a picture of him that's circulating on the internet, sitting in front of what must have been about 10,000 Post-it notes that he'd put all over the floor. He said that since the 70s, when he started stand-up, he's kept every single joke he's ever done. And he's kept them like in a Rolodex, in these files. Could you imagine, like, there's this joke from 1983, Jesus. And it's about a wedding or my mother-in-law or whatever, and he's kept it. And that's the whole process of testing. So when you go on a podcast, I say to my clients, like, practice the 80-20 rule, which is 80% use your existing content, your refined content, your set, the stuff you're really good at, you've worked on, that you've tested, people understand it, and then try something new, try a different way of delivering it, a different way of telling the story, different language, and get the feedback.
Yeah.
So if I say agile storytelling and people are like, crickets, this like sound of silence, I don't get it. Then I get that feedback and I think, actually, maybe people don't understand that word. I'll try something else. But if you say to me, I'm really interested in agile storytelling, that's a bit of feedback.
Yeah.
And I think, okay, that worked. So I roll that up and then just keep test. Get on stage, commit your story to an audience and get feedback. Get on stage. Every single podcast is a stage, an opportunity to test. And that's the only way you're going to get better at this thing, is just keep committing and facing the moment of truth. Face rejection, not just tell your co-workers or your family and go, oh, that's great, I like that story. You need to get real feedback, right?
Yeah.
And that's where you get better, in that uncomfortable zone or outside the comfort zone.
That's true. And because not everyone either is like quick on their feet or can just pivot in any conversation. They're like, no, I need my 5 questions so I know how to answer them. And it's like, some people, it doesn't come naturally. Some people can chat, some people go off way tangents. So it's like, I like your 80-20 rule and kind of testing and seeing the feedback. Cause you're right. I've been on podcasts and I think I'm going to talk about all of this. And then all of a sudden they're like, ooh, wait, that thing you mentioned, let's talk more about that. And so I'm kind of like, oh, people, I didn't think people would be interested in that one thing. And so I'm like, maybe I should talk about that more, or change my talk a little bit. Do you know what I mean? To weigh that heavier. So I like that in getting feedback. And it's not like your podcast has to be this one talk and it's like the script and it's unchangeable. I've never quite thought of it that way, right? Like testing and getting that feedback in your storytelling or your talk.
Yeah, it's ongoing. It's just a lot of practice. If you look at people who appear really effortless in any
Hmm.
discipline, whether it's podcasting or stand-up comedy or musicians, they're on stage and they're effortless, but that's thousands and thousands of
Yeah,
hours of rejection, which we don't see, right?
I
We
know.
don't see that. And I put it out there to all, prospective podcasters, whether you're guesting or you're starting your own podcast or in the process of growing your podcast, is take every opportunity to get on stage and don't throw away opportunities which appear small. So, for example, even if a podcast has 100 listeners, get on it and practice, share, you'll get better. Like these stand-up comedians, they'll go to, the dive bars where
Yeah,
you've got
yeah.
5 people in an afternoon because they want to practice
Yeah.
everything. You've got to
Or
understand in
test. Yeah.
podcasting, there's two real factors here: the intrinsic motivations and the extrinsic motivations. And the extrinsic are the obvious ones, like how do I build my personal brand, thought leadership, create a funnel, etc. But the intrinsic ones are storytelling, because that skill is the prime mover. That's the big force multiplier in all business. If you can become better at storytelling, you become better at everything. Whether that's sales, hiring, raising money, copywriting, podcasting, whatever it is, you become better at everything. So use that opportunity to practice.
And I find, like, just with what you said, like, you have more impact on people, or would you say that you have more influence on people if you're better at storytelling?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Influence or impact? Influence or impact? Well, definitely influence, because storytelling, well, you think about the world of marketing, it's all storytelling, right?
Yeah.
The best marketers ever were those that sold soda. If you think about the skill in being able to sell fizzy, sugary water, which is, that's what it is, right? With a bit of coloring and caffeine in it. That skill, that's the real pure element of storytelling, where there's nothing that separates you from the next guy. There's nothing that separates your service from the next one. There's no barrier to entry. There's nothing that you have access to that they don't have. So you can really see the ability to influence people through that. And it is a very powerful way. Even, talking about soda, there has been a lot of psychological research on storytelling. If you read the books by Dan Ariely, who talks about how the neuropsychological level of the brain shapes influence and perception of products, brands, and so on. It's really fascinating. If you're of an age, you may remember the Pepsi challenge, right?
Yeah,
Do you remember that? It's like there used to be these actors in a grocery store or supermarket, right? And they would drink A and B cola, right? And they would always kind of do the reveal and like, oh, the one that you said tasted better
I know.
was Pepsi. You remember that? Yeah. All this time I've been drinking the worst tasting cola. So damn, I've been tricked. But the interesting thing about that, even though Pepsi told us that it tasted better than Coke, and it does, because neuropsychologists have tested it, and in more cases than not, people say in a blind taste test, Pepsi tastes better. But the interesting thing is that blind taste tests only work with blind customers, right?
Yeah.
That people, if you go back to the Predictably Irrationally book, they tested students. They always test students in these things because they need the cash, right? They don't care, just like feed me these things and I'll do your experiment. So they tested these students. They did the blind taste test. Yes, Pepsi tastes better. And then they asked them, okay, we're going to change this round, but I'm going to give you the colas, but you're going to see which brand is which before you drink it. Exactly the same, but they knew which brand they were drinking. And they said that Coke tasted better by a factor of 4 to 1.
Wow.
4 to 1.
That's weird.
So even though people say, oh, I'm not influenced by story.
Come on now.
The actual expectation of the brand, of the story, had shaped the experience at the neuropsychological level. And
interesting.
That's the important fact, is that, and Seth Godin,
it's like it changes your DNA or something.
Yeah, it changes the chemical constituency of the reactions in your brain. So even if we think that this is kind of like this fluff, it's actually changing how we experience the world. And that's the power of story. That's the influence part. And so if you can influence people, you can impact people as well, for sure.
Absolutely. I love that. We've come full circle. Now you have the 3-box storytelling technique in helping, influence, lead people. Can that be applied? Maybe you can touch upon that, and can it be applied to podcasters in sharing their story?
So the 3-box storytelling technique is really simple. It's break your story down into the past, the present, and the future. And I know that's nothing amazing in terms of a reveal for your audience, but it's amazing to what extent we miss that opportunity.
Yeah.
And even when people tell a story, it doesn't have to be about themselves. It can be about how you launch this product. That normally what people would do is they would tell it past, present, future. I was doing this, and then I found this, and I created this, and I built this, and this is what I want to do next. Past, present, future. But that's not, if you were a director of a movie, Lindsay, that's not how you would tell the story, right?
No.
Imagine if opening scene, the opening scene, there's a dead body on the floor, and then a woman drops a gun and she runs away. She runs off into the distance, and it's like, oh, what happened there? And that's the attention grab, something dramatic. There's a real sense of dissonance, or, like disconnect or unease. Yeah, like what's going on? You want to know. And then the natural next step for the director is to take us back. How did we get here? So that's the natural instinct, to go back and say, well, boy met girl at college. This is when they were getting on. Everything was going well. And then, that kind of builds back up into this scene. So the point about a 3-box storytelling technique is to really break that down. And rather than say past, present, future, you do present, past, future. You give them the problem. This is where we are now. This is the dead body, folks. We have a problem. And that problem could be, for example, you may be a consultant, and your consultancy may be helping people with being overwhelmed with data. So the problem is, you could talk about data lakes and data security, or whatever it may be. And then you could talk about how we got here. Why you? How did you get into this space? When I started off as a patisserie chef, and then I became a data scientist, whatever it may be. That's how you got here. And what did you bring to the story? What is your way of thinking that makes people trust you and think that this is the right way to go, that you understand their problem? And I think a key point here is that, a great way to demonstrate connection with an audience is not to switch expert mode on, but to switch empathy mode on, to say, look, I really understand your problem, leaning into the problem. This is a real opportunity to do that in that sort of second scene, is say, look, I understand that you're a business owner and you want to build your personal brand, but maybe, the problem is that you're not Elon Musk, or, you might feel disempowered, et cetera, et cetera. That's leaning into the problem. And then the future is painting the promised land, which is, this is where it can take you.
Right.
This is the transformation that needs to happen. And if you think the 3-box storytelling is used in thousands of years of books, movies, theater, myth, it's everywhere. And I put it to everybody, your listeners, that if you want to get really good at storytelling, don't try and create a story that's new. Try and create one that's familiar, and just leverage familiar. You don't have to be, don't create a new plot line. You just take an existing plot line and change all the actors.
And don't necessarily
directed.
Because it is true. We default to the linear approach, right? Like, all right, let's start at the beginning and then like work our way up, versus like, well, books and the rest of the world do it a different way to, like you said, invoke curiosity and kind of build that tension, and people are kind of like waiting for the next thing. You
get that when you're reading, don't you? If you like download a book from Amazon, and now like you download a book from Amazon, it's like you read the first 2 pages, it's like, nope, next. First 2 pages, nope, next. That's the reality now. That's all you've got. I know. So if you say like the first page is like, let me tell you about myself, it's like, next, out. that's the
true.
problem. That's the attention economy, right? You have
Yeah.
to be aware of how it impacts people's, bandwidth to interact with us.
Yeah. True. Now, I also like what you say about find your start before you find your why,
Mm.
which seems counterintuitive because everyone says figure out your why and then move forward.
Yeah.
Why do you debunk that?
Well, I don't think that it helps us, does it, when we're kind of stuck trying to find our why. It's a bit like we do celebrate the survivors, if you like, in the successful ones. I mean, we look around. If you think about, who are the kind of role models for entrepreneurship, and you could probably name a few on your one hand. You've got Elon Musk's, and you've got the Mark Cubans, and all these kind of people. So you could name them, and you then think, wow, those guys are really good. Look at me. I'm not a billionaire yet. So I'm still just hustling away, trying to pay the bills. Like, why would anybody listen to me?
Mm-hmm.
And that then becomes the moment of doubt, that why should you get up onto stage and tell your story? And you look around and you see the find your why
Right.
content out there. And that can, to stop you before you even start the process.
enough.
But I would put it to everybody, this is that most people who found their why didn't set out to find their why. They found it by mistake.
True enough.
They found it. It's what the Danish philosopher 𝗀𝗽𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 says, that we live life forward but understand it backwards. It's like you're reading a book and you don't understand what the book's about until the last chapter. That kind of it gives it all context, doesn't it? So
yeah. And you're like,
if you have to kind of wait. Yeah, it's like, that's what she was all about. That's why she murdered him. All that kind of thing. Why
all that
right?
crap happened. Now I get it.
Yeah, you get it. It's like you got to stay to the end to see what it all meant. But that's the context, and we don't really understand things. Steve Jobs talks about joining the dots. And if you look at his life, for example, he didn't start out to create mobile phones that changed the world, right? He started out designing fonts or magazines, right? Dropping out of high school and out of university and just having a good time. There was no why in that. There was just a passion and just following your instinct.
And a journey.
So, the difference between just doing that and actually doing it in a productive way is having a process. Finding your why is kind of the end product, but the start is really start the steps and keep testing in an agile way. And then you can make progress. You're not just going to keep drifting off down rabbit holes of interest. So I'd encourage everybody to get started and put it out there.
Yeah.
And makes more sense for me. I was always struggling with the fact that I studied AI, but was running a podcast agency. And for years and years, I didn't understand why. And I didn't understand. And if I didn't understand, my clients wouldn't understand why, right? And therefore, the only way to get through that was to keep putting it out there, and keep testing it, and eventually joining the dots on it. Look at everything that I've done in my career has been about storytelling and influence and understanding human behavior. And that's how they all come together. So they're like two sides of the same thing, right?
Interesting. Yeah, you're so right. And sometimes your journey, and it's like, how did you get from A to B? And then you realize kind of like the purpose, the why. And you don't start a business. You may start a business with your purpose, but it can be hard to come by. And I would hate for that to make people hold back or not take action or not start a podcast or not start a business or whatever that may be, that it will come. So that's very freeing.
Yeah. You only really understand when you start getting out your comfort zone. And, that's the key here. You could, if you think about personal branding, for example, and building it, is that you could spend 1,000 years posting on social media and get nowhere. Because, the casino of attention is gamed against you, right? The house always wins. But if you create a podcast, start building an asset, attracting a following and a tribe of people around you, they will then help you find that why. they will then help you make sense of things because they'll reach out to you. This is what you get with your podcast, I'm sure, and I get with mine. Random people, I know they don't think of they're random, but the connections reach out, and say, hey, Lindsay, that episode you did about whatever is hit me here. It's like, wow. And you don't even know that you said, oh yeah, I've been listening to you for the last 3 years.
And you're like, what?
Every podcast. And I follow you everywhere. Those kind of connections, that's the authenticity at scale that you can create with a podcast that you cannot get anywhere else. And only you can't sort of start with that level. You can't start at that level. You can't say, I want to build this tribe and I'm going to build this community and it's going to be about this. It happens very organically, but you have to start.
Yeah.
And that's why, you've got to, with a podcast, you've got to commit to the long term. You've got to, it's the whole storytelling process is not a destination. It's a life skill.
Yeah.
You don't do this for 2 years. You do it because it's going to affect everything in your life, not just business.
I love that. Do you coach your clients about storytelling when you launch their corporate podcasts? Like, do you weave that into your branding? Yeah, like more on technique as opposed to, because, when you're dealing with these large corporates, there's not a lot of bandwidth in this, you can't say, I want you to change that logo, the bank logo. That ain't going to happen. No. But what you can do, the coaching is more like the delivery of it. Yeah.
How do you, as a human voice for that management consultancy or that bank, how do you express yourself in a human way without firstly being wooden, being scripted, and secondly, going outside the guardrails, which is what, you've got this comms person hovering here and they're wondering, like, don't say hashtag whatever, so you've got to give them those kind of coaching, safe spaces to work with. So that's the coaching part, is to say, this is how you can do it. And this is how you can be human and connect and check all these boxes for the brand comms, and yet at the same time retain that authenticity. Otherwise, people, if you just make it into a sales message, people are just gonna, it's like the first 2 pages, they're off. Yeah.
Do you find it more challenging with corporate to get them to weave their storytelling in versus like an entrepreneur doing their podcast? Just out of curiosity.
Oh, that's an interesting question.
People are people, and it's because I feel like corporate sometimes you feel like it's more stiff and they've got like professional guidelines, and like sometimes with the corporate there's not like a person behind the business, so but then you look at Coca-Cola that totally paints a picture and makes you feel certain things. So yeah, I'm just kind of curious on your take on that.
Well, they're different.
Yeah.
With entrepreneurs, I work primarily on podcast guesting, so they've got a lot of bandwidth there, and the cycles they work on, their attitude towards risk and experimentation is very different. True. With a corporate, obviously, you have these existing bandwidth and parameters, right? But I find, Lindsay, that with corporates, there's a much bigger uplift for a host or a guest who has, firstly, they have a lot of content.
Yeah.
If, for example, they've been in corporate long enough, they have a lot of experience. They've seen what's broken. True. There's some great contacts. They've written white papers, research reports. So they've got all of that. They're not like, oh, I need a product to sell. The company's done all that for them, and they've created the brand. So they've taken all that away. So they have a lot of content. Traditional channels for them are quite restrictive, like you've mentioned. So when they get onto podcasts, that can be a major uplift for them. Nice. This is like, wow. Yeah. And then connect with they can you talked about, for example, showcasing customers' success, right, as a story. That's a great way for them to do it in a very authentic way.
Absolutely.
So there's a huge uplift potential with corporates, which nice. I really enjoy. They just kind of need what we call the green lights and guardrails, which is like, give them, these corporate leaders, they don't want more budget to do this stuff. They just want more air cover. They want the guarantees that if we give them this parameters to work with, to talk about these subjects, that they're not going to get into trouble for doing it. Right.
Right.
That's all they want. That air cover, so that they can really talk in a human way.
Yeah.
And when they do that, that's like a real release.
Yeah.
This is the first time they can talk about these things or like really connect with people. And I really enjoy seeing that, because that's kind of like, you create that little bit of human magic, which may not exist necessarily in traditional communications.
I agree. That's the beauty of podcasting. And so obviously you help corporates and you have your guesting side of the business as well. So we will have links in the show notes, but tell everyone how they can find you.
Yeah, I mean, I would say go to my personal website, because all the jumping off points are there.
Yeah.
Go to 𝗂𝗵𝗿𝗀𝗲.com. Graham, D for David, Brown. Without the D, it's a wallpaper website. Graham Brown, Graham and Brown.
That's all right. Lindsay Phillips,
you're going to go there and you're going to think,
a sandal maker. So there you go.
Oh, is you just wish you were earlier in the domain name registration game. You could have sat on that thing, right? I was thinking about that as well. I was just probably a couple of years late on that one.
Yeah.
So Graham D. Brown. Yeah. And then you can see all the stuff about podcast guesting, about storytelling, and about podcast agency as well. You can take your pick.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, I appreciate you having on. And I just realized I was so caught up in our conversation that I forgot to pause to share my favorite tool and my pun. So I will just quickly share my pun so that we can end with a laugh, Graham. So you're ready for this?
Expectations. Yeah.
I know, right? The expectation's bigger than the reality now. All right. So how much does a chimney cost?
How much does a chimney cost?
Nothing.
I don't know. Like, how am I supposed to?
Nothing, because they're on the house.
Is that a pun?
That's a good one. Come on.
Is that a pun or just a dad joke in disguise?
I know. I love them. They're awesome. So on that one, I'll let you share that with someone today. I appreciate the chat and our chance to talk about storytelling. And so you've changed my approach and my thoughts on it. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. You didn't share the tool either, but then maybe that's find out next week, folks.
There you go. All right. Have a good one. See ya.
Thanks, Lindsay. Bye-bye.